Korea, home of the Dragon King, land of the morning calm. On the 25th of June 1950, Chinese and Russian-backed North Korean Communist forces attacked across the 38th parallel, igniting a brutal civil war. Casualties were high as UN forces mounted a desperate defence of the Pusan perimeter.
Guys fell around me as mortar rounds zeroed in on us. One of my young guys got it in the middle. Oh Jesus, the guy was moaning and groaning. There wasn't much I could do but pat him on the head and say, hang in there.
The Allies fought off the Communist hordes, received reinforcements, and launched a brilliant counter-offensive that took them all the way to the Chinese border.
Beneath British and American guns, the commandos race for shore. Down the scrambled nets as quick as you can, just like D-Day.
Then the Chinese attacked. The Chinese swarm overran the Allied defences, taking over 7,000 prisoners.
In the early stages of the war, some prisoners, including Western civilians, were force-marched north under a notorious Korean officer known as the Tiger.
The Tiger had dropped to the back of the march at this time, and he came striding along by the march and found these men lying by the roadside. And in a great rage, he stopped the march and said, I gave orders that no one was to be allowed to fall out. Who allowed these men to fall out? And they discovered that men had fallen out from 5 sections. He said, I'm going to shoot the leaders of these sections. So Commissioner Lloyd intervened, and finally the Tiger said, well, I'll shoot the leader of the section from which most men fell out. Which leader is that? And Lieutenant Thornton from Texas stepped forward.
Have you any reason why I shouldn't shoot you, said the Tiger to the lieutenant. The lieutenant said, this, in our country, it would be unacceptable. I would be given a trial. So the Tiger turned to the assembled Koreans and asked whether they thought the lieutenant was guilty or not. And they all shouted that yes, he was guilty. The Tiger said to Lieutenant Thornton, you've had your trial. In our country, sir, he said, we call that lynching. And he was shot in the head and thrown in a ditch.
In that 8 days' time, they'd taken over 800 prisoners, Americans, a few British, Marines, you know, everything mixed up. And most of us were wounded. A lot of men had frozen feet and hands. When we were captured, a lot of the, well, just like our troops, frontline troops, you know, it's pretty rough when you're first captured. Well, they took our boots and gloves, everything away from us. A lot of men had frozen feet and hands. And they had us at this collection point. They had a few interrogations there. And they separated a few from us, not too many, I guess maybe 20 or 30. What they figured were G2 types. The guys had special information. And these men they sent to a place we call Pox Palace for special interrogations. Anyway, they started us on the march. And this march lasted a little over 3 weeks. And during the march, I guess there were about 10 men that managed to escape. I don't know if they ever made it back to the lines or not. But we would march all night, stand up all day, sleep standing up. When we reached this permanent camp out of over 800 men that started the march, there were only a couple hundred of us left. In other words, over 600 men died for one reason or another along the way. In 1953, when we were released, out of this original group of us, 200 and some that made the march, there were only 87 of us still alive.
Let us review once again the weaknesses in the American character. First, the average American can't or won't think independently, but is always ready and eager to go along with the group and let the others do his thinking for him. Second, he seems to lack confidence in his ability to solve his own problems. By himself, he is frightened and insecure. He expects others to make living easy for him. Third, He talks a great deal about his concern for others, but basically, he lives only for himself. And fourth, the American is not committed to a definite standard of conduct. He has hazy concepts of right and wrong. In short, he is an opportunist. He will do anything for a price. The decadent capitalist society breeds these weaknesses. We can use them. Upon assuming your positions, you, as instructors of American prisoners, can exploit these weaknesses in order to control them.
Not flattering, certainly. These are communist ideas from actual Chinese documents. Maybe it should be written off as pure tripe. Americans went into Korea to do a job. A nasty, dirty, dangerous job. A job that none of them asked for, but they fully intended to do it. Among them was Dr. William E. Mayer, physician and psychiatrist of the United States Army Medical Corps, who served as a member of the Joint Medical and Intelligence Team, which made a comprehensive study of Americans who returned after nearly 3 years as captives of the Communist Chinese. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ronald Reagan. I'm speaking to you now not as an actor endeavoring to entertain you, and certainly not as an announcer speaking for a sponsor. I talk as Ronald Reagan, American citizen, to you, American citizen, concerning the Communist Chinese appraisal of our national character. Did they have our number? Was it all enemy tripe? We began to learn the answer when the Communists released back to us the several thousand men they had held for nearly 3 years. What I have to tell you now is Dr. William E. Mayer's own story, as he saw it and as he believes it now can shape our future. The Americans who fought in Korea were a good representative cross-section of healthy American males in the 19 to 24-year age group. The majority could be considered average. They were well-trained and well-armed, and they came from all over America. They fought bravely and well. But as always, too many good men died in battle, and a few were captured. When hordes of Chinese communists surged across the Yalu unexpectedly, many an American soldier awakened one morning in his foxhole, face to face, almost literally, with thousands of heavily armed enemy troops. In nearly 3 years of captivity in established POW camps, not a single American prisoner successfully escaped and got back to our hands. And there was something else that concerned and alarmed Dr. Mayer and his fellow researchers: the death rate among the Americans. Out of 7,000 men taken prisoner, more than 3 out of every 10 died in captivity. Being captured by an enemy is a shocking experience for any soldier in any war. In Korea, this shock was made sharper because no one knew quite what to expect, except possibly the worst. Starvation and brutality, maybe, or torture even. Oriental torture, such as burning bamboo splinters under the fingernails. Then there'd been talk of brainwashing. Wasn't brainwashing a big thing with the Chinese? Maybe they even used narcotics.
Gentlemen, we welcome you to the ranks of the People's Democracy. We are happy to have liberated you from the Wall Street warmongers who sent you here for their profit. We have nothing against you, and we want to offer you a fair proposition. All we ask is cooperation and fair play. For you, this war is over, so don't fight us. Sit back, be like others, relax. Make yourselves comfortable like the other men are doing. You have nothing to fear. We want to be your friends. There are no slave camps here, no road gangs. You will not be put to work. We will give you free the best food and shelter and clothing we possibly can. Now, it won't be good by your standards. We are a poor country, but it will be the best thing we've got, and you won't have to work for it. Finally, we will give you the thing we know you really want most, a chance to learn the truth. When the warmongers have made enough money, when they let this senseless slaughter end, we just want you to go home to your own good homes and find families and simply tell them the truth, as you yourselves decide the truth to be.
Well, you've got to admit, this beats burning bamboo splinters under your fingernails. It was almost as irresistible as the deals you hear over the radio. Get it now. Don't deny yourself a thing. Sit back. No need to work. Get yours. Everybody else is getting theirs. Yes, this was pretty much the way in which our men were greeted by the Chinese and how their captivity began. Oh, yes, once in a great while, there was some mail from home, carefully sorted out, of course. Thus it was that if your wife wrote you every single night for 6 months and told you that she loved you, she waited for you, she prayed for your return, not to worry about her, just take care of yourself and come home. That's the kind of letter you didn't get to see. But finally, when she lets her hair down and tells you that the kids' noses are running and she can't get them in at the dispensary, and the allotment isn't enough anymore, the car's on the fritz, and significantly, she sure wishes she could go out dancing once in a while. This was the one letter you got in your mud hut in North Korea. It might well be your only letter in 6 months. And from Dr. Mayer's own standpoint, as a physician and psychiatrist, it was this period which disturbed him the most. Because it was during this period when most of the men who died. Give-up-itis, they called it, when the weakest simply turned their faces to the wall, covered their heads, and within 48 hours, were dead. And from the Chinese, no torture, no coercion. The Americans were still left mostly on their own as the months dragged on, alone and without alien influence of any kind. Complete isolation. This was typical of many of the American POW camps in North Korea. No barbed wire, no watchtowers, none of the precautionary measures normally taken to prevent escape. Nothing but the cluster of mud huts that make up a Korean village to provide a miserable shelter for several hundred Americans, with seldom more than a few Chinese soldiers to guard them. But it was after the first few months that we began to see the communist Chinese indoctrination. The application by the Chinese of a finely developed educational program, one that occupied every day, all day, 7 days a week for the great majority of prisoners. It was a classical anti-capitalist, anti-American diatribe of the sort the communists have been publishing for years. Afterward, there were discussions in which every prisoner was forced to participate, but not by the Chinese. Oh, no.
Come on, soldier, get with it. Sum up this lecture for our instructor so we can get some chow.
Then there were the public confessions, where each prisoner was required to stand up and perform an exercise of public self-criticism, confessing to one and all his past sins against society.
Oh, we had several slaves, about 2,000 per acre. Beyond that, we owned most of the land. We drove Cadillacs all over, and there was a yacht for everybody. One for me and one for my daddy, and money was nothing to us.
Not because they believed what they heard or what they said. Nothing of the kind. They simply went along. They did what others expected them to do, even though they knew it was wrong. Why?
There were some things I wasn't too proud of. I haven't mentioned before. Like the time I took your food rations when you were sick. Or the time when I took medicine from you. And I also informed on some guys who were breaking out of Compound 14.
Well, everyone else was doing it. And to be popular, you went along too. If you didn't, well, a guy could become mighty unpopular.
All right, gentlemen, dismissed.
You had a free choice, of course. You could enjoy either popularity or respect.
Rotten crumb.
Not very many chose respect. Only a few. Respect, it seems, earned its own reward, not from your fellow POWs, but from the Chinese, who always acted promptly.
Poor fellow. What a shame. Obviously, he doesn't place the need of the group above his own selfish purposes. We won't hurt him. We'll take good care of him, just as good as we are taking care of you.
Those heroic soldiers who did try to organize the others for escape or to resist the Chinese were segregated in special, heavily guarded camps for hopeless reactionaries. In this way, divide and conquer. Utter planned isolation of the individual was accomplished by substituting the standards and values of the group for those of the individual. Men who didn't conform, who tried to lead, were denounced as poisonous individualists and segregated as criminals. This is the fundamental device of communism, based on the idea that one man has no significance. He is just a fragment of the mass, the class. Becoming and remaining in favor with the Chinese included informing on fellow prisoners, telling about bad attitudes and reactionary remarks, or infractions of camp rules. But it really didn't mean much, because after all, the man informed upon was never punished, not actually. He had only to confess his crime to a sympathetic camp instructor, write an essay promising never to repeat his crime against society, and sign it. That's all. Now, what harm is there in this? The man informed upon wasn't really furious at the man who'd informed on him. He didn't go back to camp and try to kill him or beat him up. He never felt exactly the same about that fellow again, was careful what he said, and never got close to anyone again. He became more isolated, alone.
At the end of the war, 23 Westerners refused repatriation and adopted communism fully, choosing instead a new life beyond the Yellow River. These men became known as the Turncoats.
Freedom song, freedom song, freedom song. We rejoice to show the world that we are strong, we are strong, we are strong. Does anybody want to go home? No!
Tonight is the youngest U.S. Army turncoat of the Korean War. You see him behind me. He's David Hawkins of Oklahoma City.
The Mike Wallace Interview.
3 years ago, the United States was stunned by an announcement from war-torn Korea. U.S. Army Private David Hawkins and 20 other prisoners of the communists had become turncoats. They had renounced their own country and disappeared behind Red China's bamboo curtain. Dave, first of all, let me ask you this. Another explanation of the turncoats was suggested in the New York Times on August 14, 1955. Most of the turncoats really were not converts to communism, but were themselves guilty of crimes against their fellow Americans in captivity and did not wish to return to face the music. What about that?
I don't consider that true. None of the fellows that were with me were, I read some articles also on this, on clippings that we received while in China, that said that a lot of us were guilty of murder or had committed acts of treason while in the camp, or stolen food from their buddies, or was responsible directly for another fellow prisoner of war losing his life. We had no business over there, and I actually felt that way.
And do you still feel that way? That we were wrong to go to Korea?
Yes.
When I say we, that the United Nations was wrong to try to contain communism there, that President Truman was wrong?
I think it was a mistake still.
But why so?
But I don't think that we have the right to interfere in a civil war of another country, to try to stop it when it's not even close to our own shore.
You believe then, you believe now that that was a civil war?
Yes.
Most of the turncoats eventually returned to the West. One man, James Veneris, married and built a new life and stayed in China until his death in 2004.
I am James G. Veneris of Hawthorne, California. Under the present conditions in the States, I cannot return. And when peace is established in the world, then I'll come back. You can blame all of this on the reaction in the United States and on McCarthy and his clique.
Bai Xirong, his widow after 40 years of marriage, still lives in the same apartment in G9.
就是我的饮酒，就是我的老伴儿，分不开的，被偷到笼。
After surviving the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, Veneris became an English professor at Shandong University. Promoted as an international freedom fighter, he was part celebrity, part curiosity. And in the ideological struggle between communism and capitalism, Veneris became a valuable propaganda asset. He wanted to become a member of the Chinese Communist Party, but was never granted citizenship. In this clip, Veneris discusses his capture during the Korean War.
我在山上里边有一个院儿，一个小空窿，山洞，对，一个山洞里。我在里边哈，他们不知道了我在哪，我也掩盖起来了，我用那个树木。可是以后哈，他们都吃饭了，吃完了饭以后，志愿军来一个志愿军啊，拿一颗烟，都给每一个人一颗烟。
志愿军给那些联合国军发烟，
哎，
那是战俘。
哎，对了，给他们烟吃，我是烟鬼。 我那个洞里边哈，24个钟头没有抽烟，我也顾得慌。哎，我拿我的步枪，我下来了。我那个志愿军可是可高了。我想原来我想中国人可是都野的。嘿，他看我，他说 ，Do you surrender？ 他说的英文的，你投降了吗？我说我投降了。我投降了，意思是 sit down， 让我坐下，让我坐下。 Have a cigarette， 他就给我一根烟抽。哎呀，可惜了，可劲了。
那我知道了，你这个投降志愿军的做战俘，是为了那根香烟。
对，
对，对。
曾经申请过要加入中国国籍。
My father applied for Chinese citizenship, but for unknown reasons it wasn't approved.
再后来他那个。
Then, right before he died, we were told that his request was going to be granted. But it was too late.
还没办嘛，他就去世了。
昨天他说他想入党，我得保他什么中国。
He always said that he'd like to join the Chinese Communist Party
都是中国人。
because the Chinese saved his life. He had deep feelings for them.
在朝鲜战争哈。
He almost died in Korea, and the Chinese took good care of him.
那个时候照顾。
He never forgot that.
Vicious hand-to-hand warfare, then a hellish forced march, and several years of communist indoctrination, half-starved and sick in a Chinese POW camp. Is that all it takes to convert a captive to the belief system of the captor? The greater majority of POWs did not convert. Even if they played along whilst they were in the camps, they soon forgot all talk about communism upon their return home. The public were initially suspicious of returning POWs, and some found themselves shunned. Rumours of brainwashing and Manchurian candidates abounded. Many returning POWs endured the shame of having been used as part of the Chinese propaganda program. There aren't any accurate records of suicide rates among veterans from this era. During the Vietnam War a decade later, a very different attitude towards POWs prevailed. This was a direct result of the hostility directed towards the Korean POWs. Were the turncoats brainwashed? Or did they abandon the land of their mothers freely? Did they truly believe in the moral superiority of a communist utopia? Or were they just opportunists? Or were they experiencing Stockholm Syndrome?